Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Histories of science in the 20th and 21st centuries have focused on relativity and quantum mechanics. But quietly in the background, there's been a third area of exploration which has equally important implications for our understanding of the universe. It is unknown to the general public, despite the fact that many Nobel Prize winners, senior academics, and major research centers around the world have been devoted to it. It is the study of plasma. My guest this week on Vox Novus, best-selling author Professor Robert Temple, has been following the study of plasma for decades and was personally acquainted with several of the senior scientists, including Nobel laureates, at its forefront. His website is robert-temple.com, and he joins me this week to share his path and latest book, A New Science of Heaven. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Professor Robert Temple. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Victor. Well, it's exciting to be on a new voice with you.
Thank you, sir. Robert, please share with our listeners your path and how it led to the body of work you've shared with both the scientific community and those fascinated by it.
Well, I'm one of those difficult people who is never satisfied and always wants to know all the details. And so if any subject comes up and I'm given a quick and ready answer, I never believe it. And I don't believe in herd thinking, and I don't believe in conventional thinking, and I don't believe in standard answers. And so as a result of my difficult personality and my extraordinarily pertinacious determination to get to the truth, I have spent years researching the subject of plasma, which constitutes most of the universe, as you know, Victor.
And tell us about some of your earlier work, sir, the books.
Well, my first book was called The Serious Mystery, and it dealt with a mystery, which still hasn't been solved, about how an African tribe called the Dogon in West Africa knew all kinds of advanced astrophysical knowledge about an invisible star and its orbital period, which they could count despite they couldn't see it, and what that all meant. Then after that, I published some books about the history of oracles and divination, and the extraordinary ability that the priests and priestesses of Delphi had about incorporating irrational thought into the rational thought of classical Greece by posing riddles, which they did in their oracular pronouncements. Then I did a book on hypnosis called Open to Suggestion, which was actually banned in America. So I'm one of those shameless people who's been banned in America. Believe it or not, that was 1989. And it was the CIA who stopped it because 8 different publishers wrote to my agent and said that they wanted to publish the book, but they couldn't because these 2 men came to see them and said it was against the security interests of the United States. And they must, under any circumstances, publish the book. And of course, what they were worried about was that I was explaining mind control and the programming of assassins. Then I wrote a book about the history of Chinese science and invention with a man called Joseph Needham, and that was called The Genius of China. And it described how most of the inventions that led to the formulation of the modern world, as we call it, were Chinese in origin rather than Western. Some amazing things there. If anybody ever wants to look at the book called The Genius of China, they'll have a lot of surprises. And then I've published 2 books on ancient Egypt, I did one jointly with my wife called The Sphinx Mystery, which describes all kinds of things about the Sphinx that most people don't know, such as whose face is really on it, which I've proved. And I've been inside the Sphinx. I took photographs of the tunnel inside the Sphinx. You entered by its bottom. And I explain why it no longer leads all the way through to the head, because it was filled with concrete in 1926. And I explain why. And then I did a book called Egyptian Dawn, which has not been published in America. And it deals with the origins of ancient Egypt and talks about the megalithic culture of North Africa. And I describe and show photographs of the world's largest megalithic ring, which is in Morocco, hard to reach, which I visited long ago. And I talk about the megalithic remains that are strewn all the way from Morocco across to the border of Egypt, with a great concentration of them in Algeria and Libya. And people don't tend to know any of these things. And so I've written about all kinds of subjects. I've published a volume of translations of poetry by Rainer Maria Rilke called The Sonnets to Orpheus. I've translated some of Chaucer from Middle English. And I have a lot of fun jumping from subject to subject. But now we're here to talk about my new book, which is called A New Science of Heaven, which is not unlike a new voice.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your prolific body of work. And I think after we do this one, we're going to have you back in the not too distant future to talk about your earlier works. So you share the word proticity and attribute this to the research of your late friend, Nobel chemistry laureate Peter Mitchell. Please tell us about proticity.
Well, Peter was the most wonderful man who endured 20 years of being called insane, deranged, horrible, don't read his papers, he's totally crazy, and so on, because he challenged conventional thinking in terms of the use of energy by cells in the body. So finally, he proved himself right, got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1978, and all those creeps who've been insulting him for all those years said, "Oh, Peter, we knew you were right. We always knew you were right," which, of course, is just the way hypocrites behave. So what does it mean to talk about proticity? Well, electricity is the flow of electrons, as most people know. If you turn on the light, you're using electricity. But there are also positive charges in the universe, because electrons are negatively charged. So what is a flow of positively charged particles called? Well, it had no name until Peter decided to call it proticity. And he proved that you could use it because he constructed a protic motor which ran on proticity. This has never been taken up by industry, or any that we know of. And the reason why he came up with this was he discovered the flow of positively charged particles known as protons across the membranes of cells. And in order to talk about that current of positively charged current, he decided to come up with a name for it, and that's how proticity arose. There are also positively charged ions, calcium and so on, which go across the membranes. Now, this proves that this kind of thing is going on in every cell in our body. And what these flows are is flows of plasma, because plasma is a form of matter that's not made of atoms. And that's what these currents are. We are full of plasma, and so is the universe. And any moment now you're going to ask me, what do I mean that the universe is full of plasma? And I'll tell you why.
Well, I'm going to ask you to hold off on that for a second, because my understanding of plasma, I spent 44 years in welding and metal fabrication technology, and first heard the word plasma not associated with blood plasma, but in association with metal cutting in the early 1980s. And plasma arc cutting involved the ionization of pressurized gases such as nitrogen and oxygen that are directed through a constricted nozzle and generate enough heat to cleanly cut through metals. The plasma you so eloquently describe in A New Science of Heaven has permeated the universe since the Big Bang. Go into a deeper explanation of plasma, how it relates to the other states of matter, and how does it manifest throughout our universe.
Well, how fascinating your background is, Victor. That is indeed plasma that was coming out of your arc welder. And in fact, when talking about hot, glowing plasma like that, we say it's in the arc mode. And that's the case with lightning that we see in the sky, which is very similar to what you used to weld with. So plasma is a form of matter, as I said a moment ago, which is not made of atoms. It's made of electrons, protons, and positively charged ions, IONS. An ion is you could consider it to be an incomplete atom. The main thing about all of these particles and ions is that they are charged. Atoms are not charged. They have charge inside them, which is balanced, so they end up with no charge. And so physical matter, which we call it, that exists here on Earth, is really atomic matter because it's made of atoms, but it's very rare in the universe. Astronomers and astrophysicists now all know, although they don't much talk about it because they don't necessarily know what to think about it, that the universe is made not of atoms, but of 99.99% plasma. Our sun is completely made of plasma. All the stars are made of plasma. The solar wind is plasma. Those glowing clouds in space known as nebulae, those are dusty plasma clouds. And so everything's plasma. And you're one of the few people I've talked to, Victor, who had such an early introduction to the use of plasma, and you were doing it yourself. So well done. That makes you closer to the subject than anybody who's ever interviewed me.
Let's talk about some of the forms of plasma. Talk about ball lightning for us, please.
Oh, there you go. Now, ball lightning is a mystery. And there are many, many, many books about it. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of cases of people reporting it. So if anybody says it doesn't exist, you can just ignore them. So what is it? Well, ball lightning is thought to be glowing balls of plasma, but it comes in different kinds. A ball of ball lightning can actually pass through a solid wall and emerge intact on the other side. So that's one of the strange things it can do. On the other hand, it can also bounce on the ground. It can go at vast speeds up. It can zip up into the sky and disappear, or it can creep along and crawl along. It often comes rolling down the aisle in the middle of an airplane at 36,000 feet. It can kill you if it hits you, or it can bounce off you and not hurt you. All these things are possible. But the most fascinating thing about ball lightning is that there are accounts of it behaving in an intelligent manner. For instance, there's the classic case, in fact, I think there are several like this, where it was seen to be investigating the pattern on a Turkish carpet. It was following the pattern as if it were studying it intelligently. And of course, an intelligent following of a pattern by a ball of lightning suggests that either it's directed by remote intelligence or has its own. And I maintain that a lot of ball lightning consists of plasmic drones, which are sent for surveillance purposes to monitor what's going on here on Earth. We can talk about who might be doing that later, but I believe that this is an explanation for the glowing types of UFOs and also certain glowing phenomena to do with what people commonly call spiritual experiences.
It's fascinating to me that you shared that because in 1968, when I was 15 years old, we were sitting in our home here in New York, and all of a sudden, a ball of lightning came through the window, basically, a closed window, came across the room, stopped 3 feet from me, and then continued its voyage. And I wonder what that was about now that you bring it up in retrospect. Who was surveilling me?
Somebody likes you, Victor.
That's funny. Now, you share that something momentous occurred in 2019 that few of us in the general population were aware of. What happened and why was it so important, yet seemingly overlooked by most of us?
Well, the problem is that the public know absolutely nothing about the plasma universe because nobody's telling them. Where are all the science reporters? I used to be one myself. I was a science reporter for 6 years for Time Life, for instance. But the fact is that the science writers of today are of a lower grade than they used to be. When I was younger, I knew so many older science writers who were very learned and very scholarly and very responsible and conscientious. And their job was to keep the public informed. But keeping the public informed these days, and there seems to be more of a desire to keep the public in ignorance. Anyway, I'm not one of them. I am trying to keep the public informed. So what happened in 2019 was that a team of Hungarian astronomers confirmed the existence of something very strange in the sky, which had originally been seen in 1961. At that time, there was a Polish astronomer called Kazimierz Kordylewski, that's spelled with a K, who said that he had found these two very strange clouds, very large ones, between the Earth and the Moon, and that they weren't emitting any light, and they were to a large extent transparent and therefore very, very difficult to see. The Polish government got upset and they told him to stop work and he couldn't continue his investigations. That was 1961. These giant clouds, which he claimed to have found, since then were called after him the Kordylewski clouds. Well, the 2019 confirmation of their existence using more modern equipment and so that it could be completely proven that they exist was momentous because it has the potential to change the entire future of our planet and of the human species. Now, why is that? Well, when I discovered in 2019, because I'm on a website called researchgate.net, where my technical papers are and most scientists are and lots of scholars. You don't have to be a scientist to be on it. You can be something harmless like a historian, which I also am because I'm actually a historian of science. I came across this and decided to contact the Hungarians, which you can do if you're both on the same website. There's a message service. And so I said, congratulations, you've discovered these clouds, you've confirmed them, and Kordylewski is vindicated and so on. Are you studying the plasma aspects of those clouds? Because I instantly realized they would have to be huge plasma clouds. Well, the woman in charge of the team wrote back and said, no, we are not studying plasma aspects. We are studying the celestial dynamics of these clouds. Well, that's all very well, but she didn't appear to know what I meant when I said the plasma aspects. And that's pretty much all she had to say. So I realized that nobody realized what these clouds were that have just been confirmed. And I got on to my friend, who is a retired professor of astrophysics, and a very brilliant man called Professor Chandra Vikramasinghe, and that long name comes from Sri Lanka. And so I said, can we write a paper about this quick? He didn't know about the clouds. I told him. And we wrote a paper for Advances in Astrophysics, which is an astrophysical journal, about these clouds being made of dusty complex plasma, which is a very specific type of plasma. Because if you haven't got dust, your plasma isn't really interesting. You can do things like welding with it, as you know very well. But what we're interested in, really, in terms of plasma in the universe, is dusty plasma, because the plasma provides it with something to hang on to. 10,000 electrons can attach themselves to a single dust particle, for instance. So you get these gigantic charged clouds, and they can do something called spontaneous generation of intelligence through self-organization. This has been proved in the lab by Professor Tsitovich of Russia and other very highly advanced physics professors working on plasma, that clouds small enough to fit in a lab can self-organize and develop intelligent behavior. And so if you've got something the size of these giant clouds in space, which together are 18 times the size of the Earth, then you've got a capacity for huge computing power or some kind of super AI intelligence. Now, even though they're between Earth and the moon, they're not in a direct line of sight. They're 60 degrees to the right and 60 degrees to the left. So you don't have to look through them to see the moon, but they move with the system so that they're always 60 degrees to the right and the left. In the points in space known as L points, L4 and L5, where the gravity of the moon and the gravity of the Earth balance out so that anything sitting there won't be budged.
And how does this affect the relationship between the Earth and the moon?
We wish we knew. It doesn't appear to affect it gravitationally because they're in a neutral gravitational zone, each one of them. In other words, there's no gravitational influence, but there must be all kinds of other influences. Now, you can send a satellite through it, but our satellites of today do not have the ability to detect the dust particles who are small enough to constitute these clouds. They are deficient by an order of 10 in other words, the dust particles in the clouds are at least 10 times smaller than the smallest particle any of our satellites can yet detect. So a satellite could go through the cloud and wouldn't detect the dust particles unless they're improved. And I hope that somewhere somebody's improving the detection ability so that we can start learning more about the interior structure of these clouds, which is bound to be fantastically complex. It will have what are called plasmoids, which are blobs of plasma surrounded by protective sheaths, very like cells in the body, double-layered sheaths. And they can exist side by side in a larger plasma entity and have completely different contents. So one can be as hot as the arcs you used to use to weld with, and the other one can be near absolute zero, and yet they'll be next to each other, but they won't be able to affect one another because they're isolated inside their sheaths. But these blobs of plasmoids would be like nodes in a fantastically complex web linked by filaments. Just looking, if you were to see the structure, very like the human brain and like the cosmic web, and probably like the fungal webs, like all webs, in fact. And the filaments would be carrying electric currents at superconducting speeds, so that we would have giant supercomputers. That's why my wonderful goddaughter, Lily Ashley, granddaughter of Laura Ashley, whose designs many people still have in their houses, has renamed these clouds the brain cloud.
My guest is Professor Robert Temple. His new book is called A New Science of Heaven. Robert, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this fascinating work.
If you really want the book, you can get it from Amazon. And I have done a recording of it as an audiobook, which a lot of people like because there are people who prefer listening to reading. My personal website is www.robert- or you would say in America, -temple.com.
And we'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Professor Robert Temple. We're talking about his new book, a new science of heaven. So, what are the implications of these clouds, these wonderful clouds, the brain clouds between the Earth and the moon?
Well, considering that together they're 18 times the size of our planet, and therefore, if they're intelligent, which I believe them to be, they have the most incredibly gigantic computing power. They would not only be super intelligent, they would probably have the entire history of the Earth stored within them because they're supposed to be billions of years old. And they would have seen, observed, and known all about the Earth from the first time life evolved here. They would follow the history of the planet, the evolution of life. They would know the history of every plant that ever grew, every blade of grass. They would know every animal that ever moved and breathed, every fish that swam. And especially they would know, because we like to put ourselves at the pinnacle of things, all about people.
That implies that plasma, and these clouds in particular, have consciousness. And if so, would that also imply that the universe, which you said is 99.99% of this material, would the universe have consciousness?
Victor, you've figured it out in one. The universe is probably conscious, but speaking in a more limited fashion, we can go to our sun. It's only 300,000 times the size of the Earth, so it may be a minnow in the universe, but it's pretty super intelligent, way outdoing in importance our Kordylewski clouds. And I would suggest that every star in the universe is intelligent. And so then we've got galaxies. Do the centers of galaxies have intelligence? Well, that's something where my speculative powers wither. But the fact is that when one thinks like this, one can imagine that the whole universe is intelligence, and that's what people call God.
Go further with that.
Well, if you're the whole universe, then you've got to be God. What else could you be?
And these specific clouds that we have in that zone between the Earth and the moon, if they are these intelligences, if they are these brains, what does that mean for us? Are they guiding us?
Well, I think they have to be friendly, or we wouldn't still be here, because they could eliminate us in a stroke if they thought that we were annoying, like wasps stinging you or something. And so I think that they are hoping that we'll make it, we are developing intelligence and we have fantastic creative abilities, which I think they find fascinating, because who knows whether giant super AI entities have feelings and emotions, you see. They may be without them, and they may find us interesting because we have them. And what does that mean? And the whole puzzle of human creativity and the fine line between genius and madness, which I believe is part of what they're studying, all this to them must be of the greatest possible interest, although we must be incredibly exasperating as well, because we go around killing each other all the time. I mean, if you want to define the human species, you would say, well, they've got two legs and they kill each other. You could call Earth the planet of the killer monkeys, because we have all these wars and genocides, and look at the violence that goes on. And we watch violent movies, and the kids play violent games where you murder people in their Xboxes or whatever those things are called, which I don't like. And so we're obviously all crazy, but at the same time, a lot of us are incredibly brilliant, really brilliant. I mean, just listen to the music of Bach and Mozart, and look at the fantastic paintings of Da Vinci and Rembrandt. We can do all of these things, and Shakespeare can write those plays. We are fantastic, but we're also crazy. So the clouds must be trying to figure out who's going to win, the crazies or the geniuses. And of course, we know the geniuses are part crazy, and we know that the crazies are sometimes geniuses. I mean, look at the evil one. So where's this all leading? This is all a big, fantastic experiment. And I think the clouds are hoping that people like you and I, Victor, because we're the nice guys, aren't we? We'll come out on top somehow.
Are the Kordylewski or the brain clouds, are they some type of observation points?
Oh, they must be. Definitely, definitely. They would be the monitors of the whole experiment. And I believe that the ball lightning plasmic drones are sent by them to surveil the surface of the Earth. I believe that the sun interferes with the planet from time to time by means of these bulk discharges of plasma, which are wrongly called coronal mass ejections. I think that they don't come from the corona, which is surrounding the sun, which does contain some atoms, by the way, because it's 20 million degrees plus. They come from the main body of the sun, and they recharge the ionosphere of our planet to help us be protected against the ultraviolet radiation. And because the ionosphere has been messed with by all the crazy generals of all the military, especially during the Cold War period, when we crazy humans exploded more than 100 atomic bombs in the ionosphere, half destroying it. And I could go on and on about the madness of tampering with the atmosphere, which has caused much of the climate change of today, far more dangerous and harmful than the carbon dioxide emissions. And of course, the carbon dioxide is a wonderful cover story to see to it that the people who really destroyed the ionosphere don't get blamed for it, so that nobody knows. But the ionosphere is continually being interfered with by all the military functions, some of which are necessary, such as over-the-horizon radar. You have to have it, but it's not good for the ionosphere. So I think that the sun recharges the ionosphere from time to time to compensate for the damage to it that we crazy people are doing to it.
Are coronal mass ejections a form of plasma?
Oh, yes, definitely. They're giant plasmoids, blobs. Oh, definitely. And they're not necessarily harmful. People think, oh, well, it disrupts radio communications. Oh, how terrible, how terrible, how terrible. It may be lasting for hours. Oh, shock, horror. But the fact is that if it's recharging the ionosphere to act as a protective shell for us so that we're not all killed off by excessive UV radiation, then it's positively helping us.
And if a satellite and or a manned spacecraft were to pass through the clouds, you had mentioned that they don't really detect them, but if they were to pass through them, what would the effect be?
Well, we don't know what would happen really, because it depends on what part of the cloud somebody was passing through, whether it would burst through a plasmoid. You see, the clouds themselves seem to have everything pretty much in balance, but they have such fantastic internal structure that if you went through the wrong part of the cloud, you might have some harm befall you. We just don't know enough about that. They're very diffuse. I guess in the States you say diffuse. And we just don't know. But they are pretty enormous. And you might find no harm befalls you. On the other hand, we can't say that for sure. You see, the study of dusty complex plasmas, which can dynamically only be explained by nonlinear equations, are insufficiently understood. And the whole subject of dust in plasma hasn't been known for that many years. And it, in fact, it was long regarded on Earth as dirt. You know, in America, everybody's terrified of this terrible thing described by the D word, the D word being dirt. One time I landed in Philadelphia, having flown from England a long time ago. My wife and I were taken aside with growling dogs and men with guns and put in isolation. And we wondered, did they think we were drug dealers or something? And so we said, what's wrong? Well, everybody else had left the plane and gone. And they said, we understand that you may have dirt on your shoes because you come from a farm. And in fact, we didn't come from a farm. but they thought we did. And they were terrified that we would have dirt on our shoes. So this is what I mean by the fear of dirt, a rather extreme example of it. And so it was naturally assumed by most plasma physicists when they kept finding dust in their plasmas when they were trying to make controlled fusion reactions to generate electricity. Everybody's heard of that, although it's never really worked. And a very brilliant man called Gary Selwyn, who was working for IBM to find out why dust kept coming into the plasmas they used to deposit circuits onto microchips and nanochips, discovered that plasma made its own dust. Oh my God, plasma makes its own dust. So that's the answer. And then they could take off all the white garments and eliminate all the clean rooms and stop worrying about dirt inside the reactors trying to contain nuclear fusion, because all that plasma was always going to make its own dust. All plasma does. And the reason it wants to make its own dust is so that it can become an entity. Dust is as necessary to a plasma entity as bones are to our bodies.
Which leads to the question, we've established that plasma has consciousness. We know that plasma is non-atomic, as Earth is. Is plasma an inorganic life form?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. If it has its dust and is a dusty complex plasma, so that it can get its internal structure and develop intelligence. It is inorganic. And that's why looking for little green men in the SETI program is probably a waste of time. We've got extraterrestrial life between us and the moon. Let's get started on communicating and studying it. Now, I have to make a remark here that the whole question of extraterrestrial intelligence is looked upon as the number one security issue facing the planet Earth by all the intelligence agencies. Ask any of them, and they will agree. So, therefore, they're nervous about anybody discussing it because they don't know whether extraterrestrial intelligence will be favorable towards us or harmful towards us. They simply don't know. And I suppose they think they're doing their jobs by being paranoid. Paranoia comes with that profession anyway. Because if you're going to work for an intelligence agency, the first thing they tell you on the first day is you have to lie about everything to everybody for the rest of your life. And if you don't like it, that's tough. I know this because of my best friend from boarding school who joined the CIA. And he couldn't stand it and he quit, which is not looked upon favorably. And he said that on the first day, he was told he had to lie about everything. He had a false office. He had a false job. He would never be able to tell his wife, his children, his parents, his best friends, anybody that he worked for the CIA. He said he couldn't live a lie like that. So he got out quick. And that was just somebody at the beginning of a career. Imagine what it's like to spend your life inside an agency. So you end up pretty weird. And therefore, your weird and twisted way of thinking, which you've been beaten into and trained into, would affect the way you would look at extraterrestrial life, because you think, well, I've spent my whole life being told to be suspicious of everybody, and now I'm faced with a giant cloud, two clouds, each one 9 times the size of the Earth. Well, I'm damn well going to be suspicious of them because I can't understand them, and I can't even interview them, and I can't even arrest them.
Let's take that one step further with the recent increase in UAP, UFO sightings and phenomenon. You had talked about ball lightning being possibly a form of drone, intelligently controlled drone. Do you think that all of these sightings are related to plasma?
Well, I think ball lightning is made of plasma. I should explain that plasma doesn't have to be a gas. You see, when it was discovered originally in 1879 by Sir William Crookes, who invented the vacuum tube, and he found it inside the vacuum tube and called it radiant matter. It had its name changed to plasma in 1928 by Irving Langmuir. And that's nothing, by the way, to do with the plasma in hospitals. That's to do with blood. That's a different use of the word. When that happened, we realized that plasma was a fourth stage of matter, the others being solid, liquid, and gaseous. But we now know, and this has been proved thousands of times over, so there's no doubt about it, that plasma can exist in a gaseous state, a liquid state, and a solid state, and can even form crystals. And there are photographs of plasma crystals, and they're not like a piece of quartz that you can hold in your hand. They're not that kind of thing because they're made of particles. But they can be gigantic. I mean, you could speak of a Korolev cloud as being each one 9 times the size of the Earth. You could say that each one is a plasma crystal that's 9 times the size of the Earth, which contains liquid, gaseous, and solid portions within it. An interior structure far more complex than the anatomy of an organic being. So I believe that inorganic intelligence is everywhere in the universe, that the universe itself is inorganically intelligent, and that the small pieces of rock that hurtle around stars and are called planets, which develop organic life forms on them made of atoms, are a tiny fraction of what's going on. But we need to not be demoralized by this in any way. We are very remarkable. And I would suggest that all these giant intelligent entities filling the universe are all potential anthropologists who would like to study weirdos like us.
We're not talking about silicon-based life form, are we?
Well, silicon-based life form would also be based on atoms.
Atoms, that's correct, yes. Even though it's not carbon-based, it's still an atom. That's correct.
May exist. It's been speculated. What I don't understand is why people who are not hesitant to talk about silicon-based life forms are hesitant to say, what about plasma life forms? Because they're what we can be sure is more common.
His new book is called A New Science of Heaven. Professor Robert Temple is our guest. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human. And she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hey, Dad. Your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can. But it's just as important to take time for yourself. AARP can help. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
If I could be you.
And you could be me.
For just 1 hour.
If you could find a way.
To get inside.
Each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Professor Robert Temple. We're talking about his book, A New Science of Heaven. About 20 years ago, Robert, biophoton emissions, in essence light, was first captured on film emanating from the human body. How does this tie into plasma manifestation?
Well, I'm very glad to hear you mention biophotons, Victor. The whole world needs to know about them. And what they are is photons spontaneously emitted by living organic bodies, which are ultra weak, so that you can't see them even if you're completely in the dark, unless you have advanced equipment using photomultipliers, which were invented in the 1950s. And that's what made it possible eventually to capture images of the spontaneous light emitted by the body in the dark, using those advanced pieces of equipment. And that's how we managed to get the pictures you're talking about. And it's the biophotons, they're called bio because they're emitted by biological body, are light particles that are emitted as a result of plasma activity in the cells. And you can, I have reproduced several of those images in my book, which were taken by Professor Roland van Wijk in the Netherlands, who's one of the world's leading biophoton researchers. And he would put people in the dark for a couple of hours so they're totally decontaminated from ordinary light. And then he would slowly capture these amazing images. And among the things that have been shown, which are directly related to plasma, are the currents that are flowing in the traditional Chinese acupuncture channels known as meridians. You can see the light flowing along these, and they're indicating the flow of plasma through these channels, which are completely separate from the nervous system and are the same as the Chinese acupuncture meridians. And so we have now visual proof of the truth of the science of acupuncture. And really much more research now needs to be done because Chinese acupuncture, having been verified by very advanced Western science thousands of years later, we need to put the two together and find out more about this energy flowing throughout the body, which the Chinese call qi, spelled Qi because of the way they spell things in English letters, but pronounced qi. If you were to spell out the sound, it would be Chee. And this is flowing throughout the body because we're constantly full of plasma flows, because we ourselves are bioplasma beings, temporarily incarnated in these physical vehicles known as bodies, physical bodies, and which we have to shed when they wear out, and we revert back to the plasma world where we spend most of our time. And so reincarnation is fundamental to understanding what's going on as we transition, different from the kind of transitioning that's under discussion in all the press at the moment. We transition from physical to plasma, from plasma to physical, and so on, incarnating in fetuses inside the wombs of women in order to get ourselves born in physical bodies. And I would say that we probably managed to incarnate in a fetus when it's about 6 weeks old. That's an informed guess. And after that, there we are. And make of that what you will. But the idea of being here in a physical body is to learn from it, to test ourselves, and to have the experience of being confined and restrained in such a way. We feel pain, we feel hunger, we feel thirst, none of which exist in the plasma world.
It's funny that we're having this discussion about biophotons, because when I first saw the photograph and learned about it, I wrote a little song lyric to the tune of Frere Jacques, and it goes like this: where is photon? Where is photon? Here I am, in your body quantum. Anytime you want them, shine away, shine away.
Well done, Victor.
Thank you very much.
We're not on the same page. We're both whimsical.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely. Are there greater implications from plasma science as it relates to the varied faiths and religious traditions of the world? For example, when Moses communicated with God as the burning bush, might this have been plasma?
Well, absolutely. I have a whole chapter in my book about this kind of thing, including a very learned discussion about the burning bush. Because if you study the text, the burning bush is described as not really being a bush. It's described as if it's a bush that's burning but not being consumed by the flames. And it's not God who speaks from the bush. It's the angel of the Lord. It doesn't say that the Lord is speaking from the bush. It says the angel of the Lord is speaking through the bush. Well, who's the angel of the Lord? So I'm a great student of the Gnostic texts and 2,000-year-old versions of Christianity and Judaism and that sort of thing. And I knew that there was a name for the angel of the Lord that was preserved by the sect of Jews known as the Samaritans. Now, the Jerusalem Jews and the Samaritan Jews who were up north did not speak to each other. They didn't like each other because they varied slightly with their doctrines. And, there's nothing worse than varying from a doctrine. So the angel of the Lord's name was preserved by the Samaritans. He was called Metatron. Well, now, that's very interesting. Metatron. So if you're reading in my book, the chapter on this, you must read all the footnotes, which were crammed at the back by the editor because they were too long, which give you much more detail about Metatron. And I discovered that there was a sect of Gnostic, apparently Christians, sort of half Christian, half Jewish, whatever, called the Marcosians, who said that there were two gigantic divine beings between the earth and the moon, very, very huge, and that one of them was called Metatron, the angel of the Lord. And so this information is preserved in the work of a writer called Epiphanius, who was a Christian of the Orthodox school, who was criticizing what the people said who he thought were heretics, the Marcosians being among the heretics. But he preserves this information about these two giant beings between the Earth and the Moon, one of which is called Metatrons. Well, that suggests that they had a psychic perception, perhaps, of the existence of the brain clouds, and they named one of them the Angel of the Lord. Well, you work that out. These are fragments of knowledge, but I do believe that the burning bush was a plasmoid, like a giant version of ball lightning, and that it could speak because it either contained intelligence or was directed by remote intelligence, and it could come across with a voice that telepathically perceived by Moses. So this could all be real, but not real in the sense that people until now have understood it, because until now they didn't have the science to explain it.
And some ET contactees claim that beings they encounter were literally light or energy beings. Is this what we're talking about?
Absolutely we are, because you and I are light and energy beings. We're just temporarily imprisoned in a physical body, but after we die, we're not. And so we could manifest ourselves as plasma beings under certain circumstances. I can't give you the details of those, but yes. They could be plasma beings perceived by these so-called abductees.
What would you like readers to take away from a new science of heaven?
The need for a new science of heaven, because our science of today is based on atomic matter, and that's not good enough. It only covers 0.001% of the universe. We need a very comprehensive plasma physics. It is being developed by hardy bands of scientists working for companies and agencies and on the fringes of physics. But we need a huge effort to push plasma physics forward so that we can understand ourselves, the universe, and ultimately our future.
My guest, Professor Robert Temple, his book, A New Science of Heaven. Robert, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Well, I wouldn't want them to find out about me. That would be telling too much. They can get my book from Amazon, and they can get an audio version of it. I'm afraid that's 12 hours long, but I narrated it myself. And you can get the ebook, and you can just have lots of fun because there's not a single equation in that book, and it's written for people who don't know any science.
And your website, sir?
My website is robert-temple.com.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm thoroughly, I adore your book. I loved your book because I'm of a mindset similar to yours. I don't have obviously the academic background that you have, but I love what you shared. And I think your message is very, very important, especially in our world as it is.
Thank you, Victor. That's a real, a lot of praise coming from you, because you know so much about these subjects. And so I'm very, very grateful for your having me on your program.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.